Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tara East. I'm a creative writing teacher, blogger, YouTuber, and the author of the mystery novel Every Time He Dies. And in this week's video, I want to talk about the idea of writing practice. We often use the word writing practice as a phrase to simply describe the act of writing. But in this video, I want to talk about actually practicing your writing skills, practicing your storytelling abilities. So this whole video exists because earlier this week I read a very interesting study of an experiment that was run at Stanford University, where a pottery teacher split his class into two. The first group had to focus on making clay pots, as many clay pots as they could within a finite amount of time. The second group had to focus on creating one single beautiful pot. When the teacher went to grade these pots, the students who had made many pots actually produced far better work than the students who created one single pot. Ultimately, the study concluded that in order to get better at something, experience was vital. Now, something we can extrapolate from this particular experiment is that the students who are making many different pots have the flexibility of trial and error. By making all these different pots, they're quickly figuring out what techniques work and which ones don't. Whereas the students who can only make one beautiful pot don't have the luxury of that trial and error. Because they're so focused on trying to make everything perfect, and they're so focused on the goal of making a beautiful pot, they're actually not learning that much because they're focused on the goal rather than on the actual process of making. We've all heard the comparative comment that writing is like learning an instrument. Even though we all technically know how to write because we do it in primary school and we do it in high school, learning how to write fiction, learning how to write a short story or a novel is a craft, and you have to learn this craft the same way you would have to learn an instrument. And yet, we don't talk about writing practice. We might talk about having a writing practice in terms of I write regularly, or we might use the term writing practice as like a stand-in for a writing session. But we don't talk about writing practice the way we talk about, say, practicing an instrument. For example, I'm going to practice the piano now, and you do your scales. We don't often do that type of practice with writing unless, say, you're in a formal course and you're doing writing-based activities in class or as part of the course, or you're responding to prompts, that sort of thing. Now, something that I thought was very interesting about this Stanford experiment was that it showed how you learned so much more by actively engaging with the process of making something. So we could take that same idea and we could apply it to writing. If you're just starting out with writing, if you're just developing the craft, or even if you're an experienced writer, you are more likely to improve different aspects of your writing if you are actively and constantly engaging with your writing in a manner that is low stakes. So rather than focusing on creating a beautiful novel, the same way Group 2 focused on creating one beautiful pot, instead, you can muck around with all different types of stories that don't really matter. If anything, the whole point of creating the story is just to engage with your writing. It's not necessarily about the story functioning as a good story or a story that is publishable. It's more about you just actively engaging with your writing practice. The science fiction writer Ray Bradbury has a very famous quote where he said, "Write a short story every week. It's not possible to write 52 bad short stories in a row." Now, obviously, this whole conversation has a lot of nuance and there are a lot of caveats that can be added to this. While Bradbury said that you can't possibly write 52 bad stories in a year, au contraire, polar bear, I beg to differ. I think Bradbury is being very generous with his comment here. Because, of course, there is no guarantee that any of your stories at the end of the year are going to be good. But there is a very real chance that your writing will improve. Editing Tara here, so the audio quality is probably going to be different. Just jumping in here to say that what is good is, of course, completely subjective, and that's a whole other discussion, and it's one we won't be having in this video. If you're writing all the time, there's a very real chance that you are naturally and organically going to start to improve. And that probability is increased incredibly if you are also actively reflecting on your stories and also critically analyzing your work. While it is possible to write a story that requires little revision, for the vast majority of the stories you write, that probably won't be the case. But the important thing to remember here is that revision really is part of the process of being a writer. But all that being said, and in light of this Stanford study, I do think that there is real value in separating your writing practice from the time you spend working on short stories and novels. One of my favorite writing craft authors is Natalie Goldberg. And Natalie is one of the very few writing gurus who talks about having a writing practice and practicing your writing. So if you haven't read any of Natalie's books, she comes at writing practice from a nonfiction angle, and it's usually from a life writing angle. So you're writing about your own life, but you are trying to be innovative on the page. You're trying to focus on details, and you're trying to make the writing lively. But you always treat this as practice. The stuff that you come out with in this, say, 20-minute warm-up before you do your real writing is really just you playing with language, playing with words, and trying to get at something original, because you never know. Something that you come across in writing practice might then transfer to a short story or a novel. Now, I have no doubt that writing in general improves all the time as long as you're doing it fairly consistently, and definitely if you are reading all the time. But I do wonder if intentionally practicing your writing would speed up your ability to improve your overall abilities, or certainly some of your weaker points. Now, I do want to add the small caveat here that it is not always easy to recognize what isn't working in our novels, which is why it can be really valuable to have beta readers and to get feedback from other people. So, for example, if a beta reader tells you that your characters are all kind of stereotypical, or maybe they're super generic and interchangeable, then you know you need to go back to the basics and learn how to develop character. So you might read some writing craft books, or Google the heck out of it, or go to some books that you really love and then try to actively deconstruct the characters and see how the author created this person on the page and made them feel real. Now, this comment does kind of remind me of the meme with instructions around how to draw an owl. And the first step is to draw 2 circles, and the second step is to add in everything else. All the books on your shelves at home and all the information online or that you can access through other people can give you the tools to write in general and to write well, but they can't tell you how to write your exact book. Editing Tara back again. So this is where writing practice can really support you, because once you've identified what the weaknesses are in your writing, whether that's your writing in general or this particular story, you can then develop practices, prompts, and activities that will actively help you and support you in improving that aspect of your writing. And now to address the elephant in the room. I can fully appreciate that it is hard enough to find time to work on a short story or to work on your novel, let alone finding time for writing practice. Now, some suggestions I might add in here is that writing practice doesn't need to be a big thing or a very time-consuming thing. It could be something that you do as a 5 or 10-minute warm-up before you start working on your novel. And your writing practice could look anything like responding to a prompt you find online or making up your own prompt. Maybe it could even be a prompt in relation to the novel or the short story you're working on. And because writing practice is low stakes and it doesn't matter, it's just about engaging with words and with language, you could find interesting ways to weave it into your day. Maybe you write a teeny tiny story while you're having your coffee in the morning, or you jot down a little story in your notes app while you're waiting in line at the post office or the bank or the grocery store. Because it's so low stakes, this stuff doesn't matter, but it could, like I said, assist with improving some of the weaknesses in your work. But I think the other secondary effect is that you're just going to feel more like a writer because you're actively engaging with your imagination and with the art of storytelling. Now, I'd be very curious to hear from you. Do you actively practice your writing? Do you think about writing as a practice? Or do you just show up to the page and you're just trying to get the main story done, whether that's a short story or a novel? I'd love to know, so please leave a comment below. If you'd like even more writing advice, of course, you can check out the other videos on this channel, or you can go to taraeast.com and dive into the archives. While you're there, be sure to check out my email newsletter. If you sign up, I'll send you a free gift, plus you'll receive a newsletter in your inbox every single Thursday morning, including a note by me, some resources that I've recently loved and think you will too, as well as some other tidbits that I only share via email. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Now go do some writing, maybe some writing practice, because the world actually does need more books.